Shadow of the Colossus is a 2005 Sony Computer Entertainment and Team Ico masterpiece released on PlayStation 2. The premise of it is relatively simple. Protagonist Wander wants to resurrect a dead woman named Mono because she was sacrificed, but we don't know why. In retaliation for Mono's sacrifice, Wander broke the rules and committed taboo. He left the land of the living to travel to the world of the dead, bringing Mono's body with him in order to revive her. The Shrine of Worship, the central hub of Shadow, houses a godlike entity called Dorman. Dorman speaks through a hole in the center of the shrine, denoted only by light shining through the gap. Its voice is entirely disembodied and arises out of storm clouds. Dorman and Wander make arrangements. Dorman agrees to revive the girl if Wander seeks out 16 colossi, indicated by the idols on the walls, and defeats them. This contract is paradigmatic Dr. Faustus, where Wander occupies the Faust figure and Dorman his Mephistopheles. But despite this, Wander heeds no concern for his own safety. Even when Dorman warns him, the price he pays may be heavy indeed. In its most basic sense, Shadow amalgamates Faustus and the hero's journey. However, it fits neither of these adequately, which is probably one of its most difficult characteristics. Faust was undoubtedly selfish and a man of learning, wealth, and personal gain, but Wander exhibits none of these characteristics. He acts out of guilt, out of a selfless need to fix a wrongdoing, although this is still questionable. He also satisfies some of the characteristics of Joseph Campbell's monomyth, while simultaneously neglecting many other characteristics. Yet the biggest problem in tackling Shadow is that it defies all classical forms of categorization. It does something wholly different from the established routines of narrative and storytelling. Yes, it's part Faust and part monomyth. It's also part fairy tale, part survival narrative, part redemption story. However, to find meaning in Shadow, we need not look at the narrative, but within the game's design. Shadow's ancient land is barren. Because of that, the landscape becomes its own character. Wander spends a great deal of time traveling through these forbidden lands, but leftover architecture alludes to a history that didn't end well for humankind. More game time is spent in transit than in battle. The player might want to stop and smell the roses, but there is nothing else she can do except explore and hunt lizards and fruit trees. Even if there were other actions to take, Wander would not participate in them. He's limited to perform rigidly in the progression of his mission. Any action undertaken by the player outside hunting, following the path to the Colossus, and fighting it ultimately places the game in stasis. Wander is there to do one job, and the game offers preciously few distractions. The player may be able to resist the call by turning off the system, but that is the only means to deter Wander's prerogative. I roughly categorize the colossi in two types, animalistic and humanoid. Animalistic obviously meaning the colossi resemble a type of animal. One of Shadow's major selling points is that each Colossus battle is unforgivingly unique. Oftentimes, this entails using the environment to the player's benefit. The only colossi Wander faces mano a mano without using the environment to his advantage are Valus, Quadratus, Hydrus, and Phalanx. 3/4 of the enemies require interaction with this environment, so this begs the question, why is there such a dependence on the land? In order to understand that, we need an awareness of the physical construction of the colossi. Both the humanoid and animalistic colossi seem to be fusions of skin, fur, rock, and architecture. The skin on the humanoids, particularly the minotaurs, appears diseased. It's blotchy and unevenly gray in tone. Alternately, fur covers at least a portion of every colossus, because that's the primary texture Wander grips in order to climb them. But the rock and architectural elements of colossi are the most intricate. In some cases, the rock forms a disturbing skeleton, humongous wings, lizard scales, or horns. Similarly, Architectural forms appear quite deliberately as rest platforms on some of the colossi, which creates an unsettling disconnect between the player's expectations and the obviously programmed artificial forms. This occurs most prominently on the humanoid colossi, which exaggerates and calls attention to their otherness. The animalistic colossi are coated in organic rock-like design, while the humanoid ones exhibit stark stone architectural forms. Regardless, the materiality of each is linked. All of this comes together in one of the game's secrets. The most curious players might attempt to return to the lair of a dead Colossus. The corpses are marked by white pillars of light that are visible from almost any spot in the map. If Wander approaches one of their bodies and prays, reminiscence mode begins. In sepia tones and a grainy film filter, Wander can relive the fight as many times as the player desires. There's no utility to the mode other than learning the fight better. It doesn't grant additional health and stamina bonuses, and there are no additional secrets connected to it. It's available as soon as the first Colossus is killed and remains available for all 15 until Malice's arena is breached. Reminiscence mode is a harmless, albeit morbid, aspect of the game, and it's not the mode itself that's important. I emphasize that Wander is able to return to the fallen body of every Colossus, and the Colossi appear fundamentally different than when they did alive. If Wander chooses to return, he finds the Colossus covered in dust. The corpses have transformed into pieces of earth, stone, and grass. While alive, they were living landscapes, and in death they become one with the earth. The ending implies that the Colossi are bastions for fragments of Dorman's soul or energy, and that Wander releases a bit of Dorman's spirit into him each time he kills a Colossus, evidenced by the black snaking tendrils that protrude from their bodies after a death. A generally accepted theory is that the Colossi are constrained to the arenas they inhabit, if not purely by geography, like being stuck at the top of plateaus, then by the aid of magic or something. To this, I propose that the Colossi are embodiments of the earth. They are incarnations of the ancient land itself. I make this conclusion simply based on the designs of the Colossi, predominantly the materials they consist of. Even the most artificial constructs on their bodies could be explained as manifestations of Dorman's spirit. Their bodies are made of fur, grass, and rock armor. The fur, feathers, wings, and spikes found on certain colossi represent the kingdom Animalia, the only tenants of the ancient land aside from Dorman. The impenetrable stone armor is the landscape literally intervening to protect their vitals, and the sickly skin and weapon-like implements observed in the humanoid colossi are physical remnants of the prior human occupants. An easily overlooked element is Ko Otani's magnificent soundtrack for the game, subtitled Roar of the Earth. I suggest that the colossi are the roars of the earth. The earth's cry of pain, sickness, resentment, loneliness, and malcontent with human interaction. As victims of tampering, they're exploited to house Dorman's essence and seal away its powers. Wander is disadvantaged against each Colossus. All of them overpower and outsize him. Yet Wander is wily. He will exploit any weakness he has to. He might not be a stereotypical warrior, but he gets the job done, and this is precisely why Wander is the villain of Shadow. What I've been building towards all this time is that Wander and the Colossi are an allegory for 21st century oil drilling practices. There are a few important reasons that lead me to this interpretation, so I will approach them chronologically. The first is that in order to find oil, companies employ geologists to perform seismic scans of the Earth. They set off seismic charges and wait for the waves to bounce back, and waves that reflect slower than the others can be a sign of oil. Wander utilizes an analogous method to locate the colossi when he raises the sword in the light. The sun's rays converge in the general direction of the next colossus, but they can't pinpoint its exact location, especially when Wander must detour through the landmass blocking his way. Wander responds to the waves the same as the geologists. Secondly, once the oil is found, the crew arrives and begins their preliminary dig, performing tests and installing the initial drill bits. I'm inclined to liken this to the trial and error segment of figuring out each Colossus fight. Sometimes the design makes it clear what the player is supposed to do, but oftentimes multiple events need to be triggered in order to achieve the payoff. Speaking of payoff, the most obvious comparison is the black ichor the colossi bleed. Consider that alongside this description written in The Guardian, in its raw form, oil consists of a black, viscous fluid made up of high concentrations of organic compounds originally derived from dead animal and vegetable matter, such as plankton, which have endured extreme geological processes over millions of years. Comparatively, stylistically, canonically, and iconographically speaking, they are identical. Picture the Hollywood image of a newfound oil reservoir, like in the famous opening of the Beverly Hillbillies. A huge gush of oil overflows, making the family rich. Oil explodes like this initially because of a huge amount of built-up pressure in the earth. Once it's exposed, an alternate method is needed to free the rest of the deposit. Thus, reason 4, oil derricks. They're the towering metal structures that pump the majority of the oil from deep underground. I don't think it's a coincidence that oil derricks in some ways strongly resemble the colossi. Fifth, where is oil frequently located? In remote, hard-to-reach or rural areas like in the middle of the desert, the ocean, or Texas. Again, there's an identifiable correlation between the remoteness of an oil rig and the expansive, difficult-to-locate layers of the colossi. The ancient land's geography encompasses all of these different environments, from habitats located deep underground to colossi in the middle of lakes, mountain ranges, and several in the world's 2 deserts. All of this in a map that takes approximately 1 hour to cross in any direction. Somewhat reluctantly, I now make the cliché that everything comes full circle in the game's climax and denouement. After Wander loses his only companion, Agro, to an impossibly large chasm, after the oppressive battle against Colossus 16, the panoptic malice, after Wander transports back to the shrine in an utterly, helplessly demonic form, does the player realize the full scope of his actions? Throughout the game, upon the defeat of each Colossus, Wander's body gradually deteriorated, growing vicious black scars all over his hands, face, and neck, his eyes losing all luster, and his red hair dissolving to black heaps. When Malice is slain, Wander reappears at the shrine to where a shaman named Lord Iman and a small entourage of horsemen pray over Mono's body. Wander wakens from his stupor. To be reduced to such a sight, Iman remarks. The man who reappeared at the shrine is not the Wander the players controlled up to this point. He lost all his senses and waddles awkwardly, unable to regain his balance, his skin now condemned with black lines, his eyes turned milky white and soulless, and large horns jutting out from his head like a devil. One of the soldiers shoots Wander's unresponsive form with a crossbow, but it isn't enough to fell the demon-laced figure. He thrashes in pain on the ground while another soldier takes his sword and impales Wander in the chest. A startlingly familiar spray of black blood emits from Wander's sword wound. His possessed body rises as darkness overwhelms him. Wander enlarges to a colossal size, a blackened and warped form of Dorman, with heavily muscled biceps, glowing white eyes, and gargantuan horns. Everything Wander did coalesces in this moment. He was only a pawn to Dorman's plans for revival, but Dorman is the physical incarnation of the Earth's revenge. The player is briefly handed control over this immense beast. Dorman fills the bottom half of the screen and utilizes two attacks that are difficult to aim. He smashes the ground with his fists and discharges a demonic breath against Emon and his henchmen. It's futile, of course. By this point, the player is an expert Colossus killer, not controller. The soldiers shoot at it with arrows and damage Dorman, but none can compare to its power. The soldiers flee from the back of the shrine. At the top of the stairs, one of Emon's followers hands him the ancient sword. Emon enchants the blade, proclaiming, "Be gone, foul beast," as he flings it down into the small pool beneath him. An immense white light radiates from the sword. The Earth's fury is put to rest. Dorman is eradicated by the sword's light, but Wander still remains in a pitiful form encased entirely in shadow. Again, the game hands control to the player, who can fight against the whirlpool winds exerted from the basin. Wander can fight against the forces for some time by clasping onto the altars formerly housing the colossi statues, but the inevitable truth is that he can't escape. He's a broken piece of collateral, both progenitor of environmental destruction and its victim. So it goes. To change focus, I want to bring up the auteur style of filmmaking. Auteur directors are characterized for having particularly strong visuals, themes, and vision in their films, and this precision and unwillingness to compromise is all part of the auteur's conceptualization. In other words, the film only exists as it does solely due to the efforts of its director, because no one else could ever make that same film. Some pertinent examples include Ingmar Bergman, the Coen brothers, Hayao Miyazaki, and of course Stanley Kubrick. Fumito Ueda, Echo's and Shadow's director, also fits into auteur theory, easily evidenced from the documentary included with the 2011 HD remakes. It's vital to establish Ueda as an auteur because my argument for placing 21st century plagues in the landscape of a hugely magical, unrealistic, mythic land needs a base. I believe Ueda noted the world's constant state of entropy and sought to realize the problems caused by hydraulic fracturing, global warming, and oil drilling in his design of the ancient land. The reason why Shadow's world is stripped of life is because the people who lived there ruined it. They worshipped some form of false gods and built lavish temples, colosseums, and monuments to bloodthirsty ritual and spectacle. Then, inextricably, they were punished, either purged or cast out and forbidden to return. It seems to me like an allegory of our moment. Ueda draws attention to 21st century excess, waste, and hubris. Humans are destroying the earth with garbage and chemicals. In Shadow's vision, we see the aftermath of this same destruction. There I find little hope for redemption, because what can a scarce number of fish, birds, lizards, and 16 godlike earthen colossi manage to achieve? For that, I turn to Mono. At the end of the game, we discover that Dorman does keep his promise to the Wanderer. Mono wakes from death and finds the body of a baby, a boy with horns, at the pool in the back of the shrine. Agro stumbles in and guides them upward. Emon and the posse collapsed the only bridge into the ancient land during their escape, so the only place for the motley group to retreat is further up, in a paradisiacal secret garden of Eden. It seems hopeless. How can a young woman, an infant, and a crippled horse survive in this land on their own, with no possible means of escape? We'll never know for sure. However, by the grace of some god, spirit, or deity, Agro led them to the secreted haven full of fruits. Evidently, Shadow's epilogue demonstrates there's still hope for redemption. Everyone who died came back to life. With the bridge collapsed, no more human hands can enter the ancient land and tamper with it. The world will restore itself. It is self-sufficient. And if animals can survive in the garden, there is hope the protagonists can too. The epilogue essentially states that if humans acknowledge their mistakes and atone for them, they can save the world. So there it is. Admitting that global warming, deforestation, pollution are killing the planet is one thing. The hard part is picking up the sword to fix and reverse the damage we've already inflicted. The newborn Wander, Mono, and Agro are proof that atonement and redemption are yet possible.